Tula, you're in my chair.
Tula, do you want to teach the class? Do you want to teach my class today? Yeah. Oh, that'd be swell. All right, you can do it. Hi, welcome back to Philosophy of the Paranormal with me, Tula. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Philosophy of the Paranormal with me, Dr. Josh Redstone. And it is a rainy Sunday as I record this lecture, so hopefully the sound of the rain in the background is nice and relaxing for you. I hope you're all having a good long weekend. I realize I'm incredibly behind still, and I'm working very hard to catch up. But I thought what I would do, I ended up doing what I thought I would do, I thought I would actually do what I suggested I might do at the end of my previous lecture on dreams and out-of-body experiences, and that is switch the anomalistic psychology and the essay writing lectures with one another. So today I'm doing the essay assignment lecture first so that you guys can get started on writing, or even just thinking about writing, or just to make you aware, if you guys want to get all of the details about the essay assignment, they will all be presented here in this lecture. I know I've been getting a lot of questions about things like word counts and things like that, so I'm going to cover all of those details today, and I will also talk about how to approach writing this essay, what I expect stylistically, what I expect in terms of citations, and all of those little details. Basically, by the end of this lecture, you should have some idea of what is expected of you on your essay assignment. And I know that by now you will have all handed in your essay proposals, so that's fine. The idea there is I'm not really trying to grade them in a way where, some are better and some are worse. I'm sure some, there will be some variation in terms of the quality of those proposals, but that's not really what I'm looking at. I will look at it a little bit, but what I'm more concerned with is your ideas and how they fit within the scope of this course. So don't worry that you've already written a proposal. I will give you all individual feedback on your proposals. This lecture is just about the assignment in general, all of the details, and how to approach it. So let's get started and talk about all those juicy details now. All right, so the details of the assignment. Well, a lot of this can be found in the course outline, but it would be a good idea to go over it here so that everybody's on the same page. But yeah, basically this essay is due on the last day of the exam period. So it's due on August 23rd at 11:59 p.m. The reason why it's due on the last day of the exam period is because this essay assignment is basically your final take-home exam. This way you can hand in a really nice essay that you've spent a little bit of time on, rather than handing in something that you only have a couple of weeks to do, right? So this essay is worth 40% of your final grade in this class. Now, late marks will apply to this unless there are extenuating circumstances and you contact me about them, right? So late essays are going to be penalized 10% per day unless you let me know about these extenuating circumstances like illness or bereavement. If these circumstances arise, you must contact me as soon as possible. And most of you that have had some kind of issue come up have let me know right away, so that's great. So don't be afraid to speak to me if there's an issue. If something happens that makes it difficult for you to get this done on time, let me know and we'll talk about it. So, don't be afraid to approach me, all right? As for the format of the essay assignment, I've got a lot of questions about this as well. Basically, most of the questions have to do with word length, which I'll get to in a moment, but I want you to hand in an essay that is typed, double-spaced, 12-point font. You can use whatever kind of font you want as long as it's legible. Calibri, Times Roman, something like that. Your essay should be submitted in MS Word format. If you absolutely can't do this, I suppose PDF is okay. It's just easier for me to give you feedback and grade your essay if you use Microsoft Word. So do try to do that. And if not, PDF is all right, but I really would prefer MS Word. That's just easier for me to grade and get your feedback back to you. Okay? And of course, all of the essays need a bibliography, and you'll have to cite all of your work properly. You don't necessarily need a title page. You do have to include all of your student information, of course. So name, due date, course code, all of that stuff. Your essay will need a title. You don't need a title page, but you do need a bibliography or references section. Absolutely. So, and of course, you have to cite all of your work properly. So you need to make sure you avoid accidentally committing plagiarism, right? Make sure you cite everything the correct way. Just a quick word about plagiarism, actually, and this is in the course outline as well, but the following examples count as plagiarism. So if you reproduce or paraphrase portion of someone else's published or unpublished material, regardless of the source, and you present these as your ideas without proper citation or reference to the original source, that is plagiarism. If you submit some piece of work, another essay, lab report, another assignment, in whole or in part written by someone else. So in this case, if you hand me a paper that I can prove is written by somebody else, that is plagiarism. Using ideas or direct verbatim quotations, or even paraphrased material, concepts, or ideas without appropriate acknowledgement in any academic assignment, that is plagiarism. Using another's data or research findings without their permission is plagiarism. We probably won't have to worry about that too much for this assignment, but failing to acknowledge sources through the use of proper citations when using authors' works and or failing to use quotation marks. This is very important. Anytime you quote anything, even if you quote me from one of the lectures, you need to cite that source and you need to place the quoted material in quotation marks. If you are just paraphrasing, you don't need the quotation marks, but you still need to cite the source properly. And that may mean for any printed source to give the page numbers as well as the work in which it appears. So that's very important. Or handing in substantially the same piece of work for academic credit more than once without prior written permission of the course instructor in which the submission occurs. So if you have an essay from another class that you think could work here, you need to check with me. You need to make sure that's all right. In the past, I've allowed students to borrow ideas that they've talked about in an essay for a different class if they want to write a different essay on the same subject and connect it to my class. That's fine, but handing in a paper from another course, just straight up from another course, is not going to fly. I want you to hand in original papers for this assignment. But if you've covered a similar idea in another class to something we've talked about here, or something you'd like to talk about here in your essay, that's fine. Just run it by me first. So if you've proposed something like that in your proposal, and you haven't included in your proposal that this is from another class, just send me an email, let me know. It'll probably be fine. I just want to know about it, okay? So those are all examples of plagiarism. Those are all examples of what I want you to avoid, because the penalties for plagiarism are quite severe. They range from failing an assignment to failing the course to possibly having to cease your studies. And plagiarism isn't something that can be resolved by the instructor alone. I have to take it up the chain of command. I have to take it to the department chair, and they have to take it to the dean. It's a whole big process that's not fun for anyone. So just don't plagiarize, okay? I don't think any of you will, but just be careful, okay? And in not plagiarizing, well, a big part of not plagiarizing people's works is, of course, citing the work properly. So on slide 6, I'll just draw your attention there. I don't really care what citation style you use. You can use MLA, APA, Chicago, Harvard, whatever. It doesn't matter. I've even had people use IEEE in a philosophy class of all places, but that's fine. I don't care. I just want you to pick a proper citation style, whichever one that is. I want you to stick with it throughout the paper. So be consistent. If you start in APA, make sure everything is APA. In text, footnotes, references, it's all got to be APA. You know, just stay consistent throughout. Now, there's a great resource that can help you here. It is Purdue University's online writing lab, or Purdue OWL. I've got a link to that resource in slide 6. I'll also put a link on See You Learn, and I'll put a link here in the video description. But this has everything you need to know about many, many different citation styles. You can find, you know, the APA manual, the Chicago manual, all the different manuals of style are there, all the big important ones. You can look up how you do footnotes, how you do in-text citations, how you put together a references page. All of that stuff is contained here. So, you know, you can just pick a style, and then whenever you're not sure about how to cite something, you can find it there on OWL Purdue, or Purdue OWL. Don't email me with questions about how to cite sources. It's all there. Sometimes you have to adapt something, or sometimes you have to make your best guess. If it's a really weird item you're trying to cite, maybe you'll have a hard time citing it. Just do your best. But most things can be found there. How to cite just about everything, even works of art. You can find all of this on Purdue's online writing lab. So you don't need to ask me, how do I cite this? Okay, it's all there. So just make sure you check that, check all of the style guides there, and don't email me with questions about that. I will answer your questions if they have something to do with the content of your essay, but not citation questions, because all of that information is online and you can go and look it up. Okay? So let's talk about what kind of different essays you might want to write. All right, so on slide 7, I've outlined a couple of different types of essays. Now, don't feel like your essay has to fit within one and only one of these categories. This is really meant to give you an idea of the kinds of things that you can do in an essay. So, you know, think of these more as like, I guess they're not really categories of essays, but like things that you can do in an essay. So elements of a good essay. So you know, you might write something that's predominantly a survey paper, for example. A survey paper is just where you survey a topic by outlining, you know, a particular area or field. You probably won't be writing an exclusively survey-based paper, but all good papers have to survey some ideas, right? You have to have a background or an overview, or, you know, one of those kinds of sections. Not an introduction. This won't happen in your introduction, but there has to be a section after the introduction that establishes the context for your thesis or your research question or whatever, right? So you will have to survey some ideas, you know. Sometimes this is called a background or a literature review or whatever, but it's an important element of any good paper. As for what particular kind of argument you might want to make, you could make a positive argument or a negative argument. And those are pretty straightforward, right? A positive argument is when you're arguing for a particular position, and a negative argument is when you are arguing against a particular position. So, you might argue in your paper that the evidence for ESP is good, and that it supports the existence of ESP, for example. That would be a positive argument. An argument that went something like, you know, there is not sufficient evidence to justify belief in ESP, well, obviously that would be a negative argument. But you can also do something called an adjudicative paper. And again, your paper will not be entirely adjudicative perhaps, but you might want to have elements of an adjudicative argument. And that is when you adjudicate between multiple positions, perhaps two, but perhaps more. So I guess taking it to our ESP example, you may adjudicate between the positions that ESP exists, ESP doesn't exist, or some kind of middle ground where if ESP does exist, it's not very strong and perhaps something we can't consciously control. This was a possibility mentioned by Susan Blackmore in one of the chapters of her book on consciousness that we read. So an adjudicative paper wouldn't argue necessarily just for one or against one, but would consider all three and try and arrive at a conclusion that is reached. You try to reach a conclusion after taking a comprehensive, broad look at a number of different positions in an adjudicative paper. So again, don't think of these as kinds of papers and you have to like pick one kind of paper and write that. A good paper in this class, a paper that's in the A range, will do a bit of surveying, possibly a bit of adjudication, and you can make a positive or a negative argument, an argument for something or an argument against something. But a good paper will have a little of everything in it, right? So these are just some approaches to get you thinking about how to tackle your paper. Right? So while I'm on the topic of, kinds of essays, I got to mention something important. You may remember back in the day in high school, you learned about the 5-paragraph essay. And perhaps during your studies in university, you haven't had to write an essay before. And you might be thinking, maybe the 5-paragraph essay is a good place to start. Well, not really for this class. I mean, the 5-paragraph essay is really just a teaching tool, okay? It's not how we actually write an essay. We never really have, one introductory paragraph, 3 body paragraphs, and a concluding paragraph. We don't really do it that way. We can't really do it that way, given the length requirements for the essay in this class, which are between 2,000 and 3,000 words, remember. By the way, when it comes to that length, you can go, a little bit over the word count if you want, a little bit, although 3,000 words as an upper limit should be more than enough. But don't go under 2,000 words, okay? But definitely do not write a 5-paragraph essay. There are no 5-paragraph essays in this class. Do not submit a 5-paragraph essay, okay? You will need to do an essay that has an introductory paragraph and a concluding paragraph, of course, but you don't want to limit yourself to the 3 body paragraphs. You need to use as many paragraphs as you need to, because the paragraphs are going to be how you organize the ideas that you write about and communicate in the paper. Each paragraph, I guess what I'm trying to say here, is meant to be like a step in your argument or a link in the chain that is your argument. I'll say a little bit more about this when I talk about what arguments are. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that this is not a 5-paragraph essay type of thing. This is a however many paragraphs you need type of thing. But I will let you know how I'd like you to break the paragraphs down. Why do we write using paragraphs? Well, it's to help organize our thoughts and our ideas. So I'll go over that in just a moment. But for now, everyone keep in mind, no 5-paragraph essays. All right, so let's move on to slide number 9. So always remember, as you're writing your essay, that the purpose of your essay is to present and defend an argument. And an argument is an attempt to convince someone else of your position, right? It's not like an argument where, people are upset and fighting with one another, right? It's an argument in the academic sense, an attempt to convince someone of your position. So you need a thesis for your essay. This is what your paper is going to be about, your main theme and your position toward your main theme or your main idea, right? And the goal of your argument is to convince the reader of your thesis. And the thesis can be found in the thesis statement. Or I guess I should say, you should make sure to include your thesis in your thesis statement. And then your argument is going to be your attempt to convince the reader of that thesis. So it's very important that these essays have a concise thesis statement. And this is one of the things that sets a really good essay apart from a bad one. You have to articulate a thesis statement, state it clearly. Usually this is done toward the end of your introductory or opening paragraph. It doesn't have to be, but it's best to state it very clearly. You know, contextualize it by saying, in this paper, I will argue that, and then your thesis, right? And remember, when it comes to arguments themselves, arguments Remember as well, when it comes to arguments themselves, right? These arguments in the sense that they're meant to convince somebody of a position. Arguments contain premises and a conclusion. Sometimes more than one conclusion, but for our purposes, let's just say your argument has one conclusion, which is your thesis, okay? Your thesis should be the conclusion of your argument. And the premises are kind of like the steps that get you to that conclusion. And in a good argument, the premises are true and there are no fallacies. So your conclusion follows from the premises because it's logically valid. And I don't have time to go into all of this in super detail here, but I do have another lecture that I did for another class all about informal logical fallacies. And I'm going to link that here. I'll put a link on See You Learn as well. And I highly recommend that you all watch that video to help you avoid committing informal fallacies. You probably don't have to worry too much about formal fallacies unless you're presenting ideas in formal logic or something here, but definitely do watch this video on informal fallacies. It will help you. But yeah, the long and the short of it is the premises should be true and the conclusion must follow from the premises. So your argument needs to be free of fallacies, okay? It should also be straightforward, clear, and concise. And this has a little bit to do with how you actually structure your argument. And a little bit to do with the language that you use, right? You don't want to sound jargony and wordy. You want to be clear and concise. That's very important. And of course, try to avoid a lack of clarity, avoid errors of reasoning too, but watch out for unclear language. That can really hinder someone's ability to evaluate your argument, right? If they can't understand what you're saying or what you're trying to say, that's a problem. So it's better to use simple language that effectively gets your point across than to try and use complex language that obscures things in an effort to try and sound smart, okay? So be clear and concise, that's fine. Another way you can go about doing all this, framing your thesis or your argument or whatever, would be to maybe pick a research question. So this would be like a question that you'll answer in your essay, and the answer will be your conclusion or your thesis statement. So really, research questions can serve the same purpose as thesis statements. It's just kind of a different way of doing it, but and even if you pick a research question, you still have to argue in support of the answer you offer to that question, right? So it's not like by picking a research question, you're just researching and writing a survey paper. That's not what you're doing. You're going to use your research question as maybe like a springboard for your thesis, right? Your research question could be something like, does ESP exist? Okay, so that would fit very well with the theme of this class. And your answer might be that the evidence is not sufficient to justify belief in extrasensory perception. So that's your answer. That's also your conclusion. That's your thesis statement. And then your argument is going to be basically convincing the reader by showing them the evidence, perhaps evidence that we've considered in this class, showing them why it's not sufficient grounds to conclude that ESP exists. And that's how you make your case. So that's all for thesis statements, research questions, and whatever. Just a few more notes about structure really quick, which you can find on slide 10. I'll go over this one briefly. So I mentioned earlier that although you won't be writing the dreaded 5-paragraph essay, you will need to have some kind of clearly delineated introduction, body, and conclusion. The introduction should be in its own paragraph, or maybe 2 paragraphs, no more than 2 paragraphs. But what you'll want to do here is introduce the topic of your paper, your research question, what you're going to talk about, right? Set it up in an interesting way. Oftentimes, I like to start a paper with an interesting hook, an interesting couple of sentences that gets the reader interested. So that is something I highly recommend doing. You may want to describe how you will proceed in your essay, and this, if you're going to do a 2-paragraph introduction, the second paragraph is a good place to do this after you've given your thesis statement. And you can just say, I'll start by doing this. Maybe I'll start with a little bit of lit review, and then I'll focus in on this argument, and then I'll counter this argument, and then I'll consider an objection, and then I'll conclude. So that's how to structure an intro. The body is where the magic happens, right? This is where you present the actual argument of your paper. And again, each paragraph should work like a step in your argument, or a link in that chain. You should talk about one thing in each paragraph. Perhaps you could use one paragraph to explain a key idea, or a key concept, or to discuss a particular line of evidence, or to discuss an argument that you're responding to. But it should be organized in a way that each paragraph, whatever it's about, is about one thing, right? One idea, or one of your premises, a part of an argument that you're responding to, so on and so forth. So that's how that should work. The conclusion, you'll summarize everything again. So if you've done a kind of here's how I'll do this second paragraph, you can repeat that, summarize what you've discussed, restate your thesis or research question and your conclusion, but do it with a bit more force. In the same way, you want to try and have a hook to catch the reader's interest in the first paragraph. In the last paragraph, you want like a hammer or a gavel, like, therefore, boom, done, I conclude this, bam, finished, argument given. Going back to the body real quick, some of you may have some questions about how, because what I've said is very open-ended. So how to go about writing a body. It will depend on how much surveying you do, how much argumentation and adjudication you might do. But a good recommendation, a good sort of rule of thumb, is to make sure you survey just what you need to survey, so that the reader knows, the reader being who, as I'll mention in a moment, the reader you're going to imagine is kind of an uninformed but intelligent layperson. She's smart, but she doesn't necessarily know about philosophy of the paranormal, so you need to explain things so that she can just kind of get what she needs to know to evaluate your argument later. So you need to have a bit of survey. If you're responding to someone else's argument, this might be part of your survey. Your survey could also be of some set of data or some empirical studies or something. But you're going to want to lay everything out fairly, be charitable, and I'll say more about this in a moment. And then in responding to the position that you've kind of set yourself up against, you don't just want to offer your case against them. So, you've got the they say kind of thing taken care of. You want to say something in response to that, and a really good essay will consider an objection to what you've argued and respond to that. You don't have to do this in great detail, but if you can anticipate and respond to an objection against your own position, rather than simply arguing against whatever position you might be arguing against, that's really good. Even if you're making a positive argument, say you're making the argument for the case, like let's say you're talking about ESP again, and you're arguing that the evidence doesn't rule it out and leaves open the possibility for ESP, you'd still want to consider a counter argument to your position. So maybe some skeptics would respond to my argument like this, and I would respond to them like this, that kind of thing. So that's another thing that will be good to do toward the end of the body of your essay. You don't have to do this, but doing this and doing it well is something that papers in the A plus range tend to do very well. So that's important. If you really want to really knock this one out of the park, you want to anticipate and respond to objections against your own position. So that's very good if you can do that. What about the kind of language that you should use? Well, again, you're writing for an intelligent but uninformed layperson. So I think it's best if you use plain, simple language. As I mentioned earlier, it's a bad idea to try and sound smart by using complex language if you don't have a good grasp of what those terms that you're using mean. So, like Albert Einstein famously said, keep things as simple as possible, but no simpler, okay? Don't try and use big words and jargon just to sound smart. You can use big words, but you better make sure you're using them correctly, because I will point out when you use words incorrectly. So keep the language simple. You don't have to use really smart sounding language to make a really intelligent point. You don't. But if you do want to use some more technical language, there's a difference between properly technical language and, jargon, right? Don't use big jargony words just to sound smart, but do use technical terms accurately. Like when we described psychokinesis, we did this, right? The definition I used was something like, the extramotor influence of objects or events. That's a technical way of saying, without using your arm hands or something, right? You don't have to dumb it down any more than that, but you could say, psychokinesis is the extramotor influence of objects or events that is affecting them without using your arms or hands or your body or something like that. So you can clarify a technical term for the reader. That's a good thing to do as well. And if you want to use more complicated, more technical language, the dictionary is your friend and the thesaurus is your friend. The Oxford English Dictionary is really great because it gives you kind of the history of the use of different words. We saw this when we read the paper on the history of the word paranormal, right? So the dictionary is your friend. Another friend is the thesaurus, which is, of course, like a book of synonyms, right? If you want to, if you're looking for a word and you just can't find it, or you can't find the right word on your own, use a different word and then look up a better synonym for it in the thesaurus, and that'll help you to make sure that you're, if you're trying to make your language less plain and a bit more technical, that will allow you to do it in a way where you actually get the words right. So don't be afraid to use the thesaurus or the dictionary, in addition to, Purdue's online writing lab. So those are your three best friends. Those are your three excellent, indispensable resources for this paper: Purdue's OWL, a good thesaurus, and a good dictionary. All right? As far as the style of the language goes for this paper, I don't really care whether you use the first person pronoun I or whether you write in the third person. So it's fine if you want to say things like, in this paper, I will argue that ESP does not exist. That's fine. I like it when papers have a voice. I don't like reading these weird, disembodied, this paper will argue this thesis. It's just weird, Somebody wrote this paper. I want to have that experience that someone wrote this paper, right? So you can use the first person pronoun I if you like. You can also use a third person one. So it will be argued in this essay that ESP does not exist. So that's fine. The only thing I would discourage is the use of colloquialisms, and to make sure that you're not using the wrong terms like malapropisms. So colloquial language, like for example, let's say you're adjudicating between two different positions, and you're saying something like, "Well, Professor X's argument demolishes Professor Y's argument." Well, that's not the kind of language you want to use, right? That's a little too colloquial. So you want to avoid colloquialisms like that. Likewise, be careful for incorrect wordings of things. A lot of people will, for example, write, "This argument is based off of this idea," right? This based off. It's not based off, it's based upon. That's technically the right way to use that, right? So don't say based off. Another one I see all the time is begs the question. No. Begging the question, and you'll see if you watch the video on informal fallacies that I'm going to share with you, begging the question is actually a logical fallacy. It's an informal logical fallacy. People use this term wrong all the time, though. They'll say, ESP research has uncovered little evidence for ESP, yet so many people report experiencing ESP, which begs the question, does it really not exist? That's not how you use that. It raises the question. It doesn't beg the question, right? So watch out for things like this. Similarly, the difference between further and farther, right? Further is figurative, farther relates to difference. Less versus fewer. Fewer applies to individuals. Less is kind of like a matter of degree. Like I'm drinking less water than Bob over there. If I had a smaller glass of water, but I'm drinking fewer glasses of water per day than Bob too. I only drink 6, but he drinks 8, right? So that's the difference between less and fewer. What else? Myriad ideas is another one. Some people say, there are a myriad of ideas in paranormal studies. No, there are myriad ideas in paranormal studies, right? So even not very technical words and phrases, you need to make sure you're using them correctly, or else the writing can seem somewhat clumsy. So, the difference between then and than even is a big one. Than is like comparative, X is greater than Y, whereas then is more like, referring to, things that happen in time, like I did this, then I did that, then I did something else, right? So be aware of using these things, using words and phrases properly, even the ones we use every day, because it's easy to use them wrong. And of course, if you can, have a friend proofread your paper, or even better, read your paper to yourself out loud. Don't read it silently in your head. Read it out loud. It will help you catch typos, problems with grammar and stuff like that, and also misuses of words. It'll help you catch all of that stuff. All right, so what's next? Oh, I've just got some quick do's and don'ts. Beyond don't write a 5-paragraph essay, I've got some other do's and don'ts. So let's go over those on slide 12 now. So my recommendation for hunting down sources for these papers is to start with the readings, if indeed you've chosen to write on a topic that's related to the topics that I've lectured on so far. You can also use, in fact, you will be required to use sources like books or papers, which you can find and access through the Carleton Library. So because of the COVID-19 situation, I recommend you try and restrict your sources to things that you can find online. So online books and online journal articles. You may, of course, reference other works if you need to. That's fine. But just in the interest of safety and maintaining distance and, staying healthy, try and just limit your research to online stuff. That doesn't just mean any online source, though. Like YouTube videos and stuff are not going to really work if you're trying to cite source material. You can refer to them if perhaps you need to show an example of some kind of spooky ghost encounter or something. But don't rely on stuff like that, right? You need to use actual proper scholarly sources for this paper. And you can do that online using the Carleton University's library and all of the search engines for online books and databases of journal articles. There's plenty of material there for you to use. I can also make specific recommendations to you. This is one of the things I plan to do, actually, in giving you feedback on your essay topic proposals. If I can think of a source that I might think you might find useful, I'll let you know about it right away. Try to avoid citing Wikipedia while we're at it. I mean, Wikipedia can be a good way to find other good sources, but Wikipedia is always changing and always being edited and so on and so forth. So I wouldn't rely on Wikipedia for an assignment like this. Although you might be able to find some good original sources of accounts of paranormal stuff by reading Wikipedia and perhaps going into the references section and hunting down, some proper source material that way. Now, one thing that's very important for this class that fits within the spirit of the class, if you will, is that you are going to encounter sources that simply make claims about the paranormal based on appeals to authority or, based on anecdotal evidence. How you handle this is going to be tricky in this class, okay? And here's what I mean. You need to raise these issues. If you've decided to write a paper about ghosts, right, you might need to talk about anecdotal reports, or if you're talking about some kind of folklore that's perhaps heavily tied in with a religious background, you might be going to religious authorities for information about some certain folkloristic belief about some spirits, like Shinto spirits in Japanese religion, or the nature spirits of the Shinto religion, or jinns are another good example of this in Islam. This is fine for getting information from a sort of background perspective. If you want to tell someone about nature spirits, or what people believe about nature spirits, you need to go to these sources. But you cannot rely on these sources as authoritative accounts of what these things might actually be, because that's what this course is all about. This course is all about applying the methods of science and philosophy to claims about the paranormal. So it's not enough to say that the Loch Ness Monster exists because there are lots of anecdotal accounts of it, or that such and such a paranormal phenomenon exists because some authority on spiritualism and mediumship says it exists. You have to treat these sources skeptically in this class, and a good essay will treat them skeptically. This doesn't mean to say you're going to immediately discard these ideas. The reason we practice skepticism in philosophy is to make the foundations of our knowledge stronger, right? Just think back to Descartes, who was a very religious man, but who doubted everything, including the existence of God, to try and find some secure foundation for his knowledge, right? This is what Descartes does in his Meditations on First Philosophy. I know we haven't read that in this class, but I have mentioned it. And it's a good example of why we want to be skeptical, because we want to find secure foundations for our knowledge. We want to say, we want to know if we can know, whether ghosts are real or not. Is that a thing we can know? And if we can know, what is the answer? Do they exist or not, right? So we need to apply skepticism. So it's not you can talk about anecdotal accounts of ghosts or something, or you can talk about explanations that appeal to some kind of authority, like how the Catholic Church in Europe would explain things that we might explain naturalistically today in terms of demonic possession. So somebody who was mentally ill may have been thought to have been possessed by demons, or maybe is a witch and they need exorcising or burning or something, right? So, but that's not an explanation that's good enough for a philosopher, right? Authority, anecdote, these are not enough for philosophers. And again, this will all be covered in my other video that I'm going to link you to, where I deal with informal fallacies and things like appeals to authority and argument ad populum just don't cut it in philosophy. So if you're going to argue, if you're going to make a positive argument for any kind of paranormal phenomena, you still need to treat this skeptically. You're certainly going to treat it all skeptically if you're making a negative argument, but you still have to treat it all skeptically even if you're making a positive argument. So that is something to keep in mind. And make sure you keep that in mind as you're watching the other video about the informal fallacies too. Okay. What about some big overall, tips for approaching this? How would you start building this? How would you get a really nice, awesome introduction to your essay going that would serve as a good springboard for the rest of your project? I'll go over this now before I wrap up for the day. All right, so having a good start to your essay really is helpful for completing a good essay overall, I think. At least this is something I found in my experience. If I have a good opening paragraph, at least in terms of my thesis statement or my research question, everything kind of falls into place. And I can complete my summary of what I will talk about after I've actually written the paper, and go in and fill that in the intro and conclusion once I'm done with the body. But it's important to have a strong intro and conclusion. And here, when you're thinking of building your intro, or even just trying to come up with an idea for a paper, think in terms of areas of interest, right? We've covered a lot of different areas of interest in this class. Let's say, for example, you're really interested in parapsychology. So we'll call that your area of interest. So maybe you want to write a paper about ESP because you're really interested in parapsychology. So your research question might be, does ESP exist? So that's what you want to answer in your essay, yes or no. If that's your research question, then your thesis might be something like, in this paper, I will argue that the empirical evidence in support of the existence of ESP is not strong enough to warrant belief in ESP. So here you're not really answering your question, so you might want to change your question to reflect that, or slightly modify your thesis to reflect your question. But in any case, the thesis statement is supposed to capture what it is you're going to be arguing. But you want to frame this in your opening paragraph with a little bit of discussion, right? You want to set some context. You want to set it up for the reader, basically. You might want to do that with contour sentences, like, something like ESP has been studied since the late 19th century during the height of spiritualism, a movement which saw mediums claim that they could communicate with the dead. The movement ignited interest in psychic powers, telepathy, clairvoyance, and psychokinesis amongst scientists and lay people alike. So, that's a little bit of background, right? So you're giving the reader some background, and, you're kind of showing the reader why you're interested in this, which is another good way to frame it. Like, you can relate this to personal experience if you want to, or you can kind of generalize. Like, many people believe in or report to have experienced ESP. Perhaps you yourself, perhaps you could start with an anecdote about how you thought something happened to do with ESP in some situation you've experienced, right? You just want to contextualize things for the reader. So if we use the previous sentence as an example, then you might want to continue on by focusing one sentence at a time, focusing closer and closer in on your thesis statement. So, you might mention that many scientists in the 19th century were convinced of the reality of such abilities, like Crookes was, while others remained skeptical, like Faraday. Right, so you could mention, you could do a bit of name dropping, talk about the history of the topic that you want to discuss here, and gradually narrow in on your research question or your thesis statement. So you could say something here like, while parapsychology emerged from the earlier discipline of psychical research and continued to study psi phenomena well into the 20th century, there is yet no convincing evidence for psi. So in this paper, I will argue that da 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 da, and then you give your thesis statement. So you want to try and frame your topic like that. Now, you don't have to force your idea. If you're interested in an area that maybe isn't directly paranormal, or maybe you're not sure, that's still okay. You may still be able to write an essay on it, but you should speak to me. And if you've already submitted a proposal about something that's kind of tangential to the paranormal, that's fine. I'll let you know what I think you can do with it to maybe make it a bit more, to bring it in line with the class. I'll let you know that when I provide the feedback for your topic proposals, which I will do as soon as possible. So yeah, that's about it for tips and tricks that I have so far. Of course, I'm happy to take further questions in the comment section or over Discord or via email. But why don't we try and wrap everything up for today? All right. So that is all that I had planned for today. I thought you were supposed to teach today's lecture. Weren't you supposed to teach today's lecture? Now, if you have any further questions, as I mentioned a moment ago, you can let me know many different ways of getting in touch with me if you have further questions. Email me, send me a message on Discord. We could set up a virtual office hours thing, or leave a comment down here if you like too. I've tried to cover everything as comprehensively as I can, but this is mostly drawn from my own experiences from when I was a student and my experiences as an instructor. So this is what I find helpful for writing papers and what I find helpful to keep in mind when I evaluate them. But some of you may have different insights when it comes to this kind of stuff. And if you want to share those, I highly recommend you do that. You can do that in the comments section or on See You Learn in the question and answer forum. If you have any insights into the essay writing process that you think your student or your fellow students would benefit from, do feel free to share those, and that would be great. So yes, I switched this lecture with the other lecture, which means that next time I will be lecturing on anomalistic psychology as it compares to parapsychology. We've already taken a pretty good look at parapsychology in this class. So I'll probably be mostly describing anomalistic psychology and pointing to the ways in which it differs in terms of its methodologies and even its metaphysical assumptions from parapsychology as we've learned about parapsychology. The nice thing is there are no further critical responses, which is great. You don't have to worry about those anymore. I only have the 2 of them graded. I'll try to get the others graded as soon as I can, but I'm going to do the special topics proposal choices and the essay proposals first to get you feedback on that stuff. But do continue to pay attention to the feedback you get on the critical responses, because your essay is going to be like a larger version of that. When I direct your attention to things that I think need a bit of addressing in your critical responses, say these could be problems with presenting the material or with grammar or spelling structure, or anything like that. I try to offer constructive feedback when I grade these things. And the idea is that this is all practice for you to write your essay, which again counts as your final exam. So try and keep all the feedback I offer you in mind. And, to that end, I will get you feedback on your essay topic proposals first, and then feedback on critical responses 3 and 4. And you can use all of that feedback together with this lecture, together with any other answers you get from me if you put further questions to me, to write a really awesome paper about the philosophy of the paranormal. All right. Well, that's it for today. Again, let me know if there are any questions. If not, I will see you next time, where we will talk about anomalistic psychology. Oh, before I go, don't forget to vote when the special topics poll goes up, which should be very soon. Please don't forget to vote. I need those top 3 choices for our special topics lectures. Okay? So remember to vote as soon as the poll goes up, and I'll see you all next time. All right. Bye for now.